Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first let's talk about the updates that are coming from Kiev. Syrskyi, the commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine, asks to restrict the exit of 16-17 years olds from Ukraine. The issue is currently being actively discussed at Bankova. The decision will be made in the spring when the contours of the protracted conflict become clear and how much the mobilization age will be lowered. Another important thing is that Zelensky reported that we, the Ukrainians, are preparing for the meeting in Ramstein. Dozens of partner countries, and among them there are those who can increase the Ukrainian ability not only to defend against missiles, but also to defend against guided bombs against Russian aviation. As for the meeting of Ramstein, I would like to remind you that this meeting is going to take place on January 9th. Another Ramstein meeting will be held in Germany. 50 defense ministers from different countries will meet to discuss the situation in Ukraine, Voice of America report citing the US Department of Defense. Furthermore, I would like to remind you that just yesterday we were talking about the lowering of mobilization age. Those days, not just yesterday, but during the previous several days. And the most important that, according to information we have, by February 4th, 2025, men aged 18-60 who had the status of limited fit must undergo a repeated medical and fight commission. So as you can see now, the Ukrainians, the Western countries, are trying to get the answer to one very simple question: how many soldiers the Ukrainians are able to mobilize once again, what kind of army the Ukrainians are able to collect during the next 2-3 months, and what kind of task this army can complete along the line of combat contact. Once again, according to my understanding of the situation, the Ukrainians are preparing themselves before another offensive operation that most likely will take place somewhere in the territory deep inside of Russia. And the Russians understand that the Ukrainians are going to mobilize another 500,000, for example, Ukrainians of 18 to 25 years old ages, which means that the Russians will be forced to start their own mobilization just to be on the same side and just to have possibilities to repel upcoming Ukrainian offensives. And there is another option for Russia to finish everything much faster. And for example, today several journalists from Ukraine reported that Putin wants to eliminate Zelensky before the end of the war. It is absolutely logical from their point of view to eliminate the institution itself and demonstrate that there are no protected places or people in Ukraine. This is a very important statement because this is the plan B for the Russians. If they see that Ukrainians are not going to stop, if they see that the Western countries are not going to stop supplying and supporting Kiev, this will force the Russians to change their tactics and to change the way and approaches they're using. Now let's move to the situation on the ground. During the previous 24 or 12 hours, the Russians carried out several offensive operations. Let's discuss where exactly the Russians were attacking. According to information we have, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians focused mainly in the area of Malaya Loknya. In this video, for example, we can see how the Russian drone was flying above the territory trying to hunt and to destroy Ukrainian vehicles, and at some point the Russians managed to discover the evacuation team of the armed forces of Ukraine, and as a result of offensive of FPV drone attack, the evacuation team of the armed forces of Ukraine was destroyed. So the Russians most likely will attack in this area during the next day or two, and we'll see the results. Furthermore, according to information we have, currently there are very heavy clashes on the territory of Makhnovka. Some sources have already reported that the Russians managed to improve their positions on the territory of the settlement itself. As for the previous 12 hours, we got just one video from this area, and this video shows us how the Russians managed to discover the temporary deployment point of Ukrainian defenders in this area and how the Russians were bombing and attacking the Ukrainians. As you can see, the worst thing for the Ukrainians happened. They were discovered by the Russians, and the Russians began bombing and attacking their temporary deployment point, and most likely this is another proof that the Russians Russians are about to begin offensive operation in this area with the purpose to take under control the central part of the settlement and to force the Ukrainians to fall back towards the northern part of this village of Makhnovka. Now let's move further. Let's discuss the situations in the northeastern part of Vovchansk. We continue receiving videos from this area. Since the beginning of January, we've been talking a lot about this territory, of how the Russians were bombing and attacking Ukrainian positions, Ukrainian forces in the vicinity of the settlement by the name of Tikha. We were talking a lot about Russian strikes along the border, and here we have another proof that there is a huge, big concentration of the armed forces of Ukraine in this area. The Russians see everything, and the Russians are trying to do everything they can, but not to allow the Ukrainians to concentrate the critical mass and to begin their own offensive. Now let's discuss the situation in the northern Kupiansk direction. Today we have just one interesting article published by the Russian sources and the Ukrainians as well, that the Russians managed to expand the bridgehead near Dvorechna on the western bank of the river Voskol. As for the morning of the 5th of January, we don't know exactly what the Russians managed to improve their positions, but obviously during the next day we're going to receive additional updates. As for the central Kupiansk direction, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians carried out several offensive operations in the direction of this pocket. The video was published by the Ukrainian side. In this video, we can see how the Ukrainians were FPV droning and attacking another Russian convoy of armored vehicles, tanks, and infantry fighting vehicles heading towards the Ukrainian positions. Lots of strikes, as you can see, lots of attacks, lots of vehicles were damaged, but we don't know for sure whether the Russians managed to improve their positions, but several attacks took place in this area, which most likely means that the Russians managed to move further in the southwestern direction and to take additional 3 lines under complete control. We expect that everything to the north of this red line was captured by the Russians. Yesterday, if you remember, the Russians reported that the village of Nadia was captured and secured by the Russians, and today we start receiving more videos of how the Russians were clearing and securing the Ukrainian positions further in the southwestern direction from the settlement, which means that the Russians, without any stop, without any operational pause, continue moving further in the direction of Novosergeyevka, Novoyegorovka. So this is the next task of the Russians. There are very heavy clashes on the Ukrainian side of the river of Zherebets in the area of the village of Ivanovka. Both sides, the Russians and the Ukrainians, are sending more and more forces and units on the territory of this settlement with the purpose to hold the positions. The Russians are trying to hold and expand their foothold on the Ukrainian bank of the river of Zherebets. The Ukrainians are not counting losses and are sending more and more units and forces with the purpose to force the Russians to fall back. So there are very heavy clashes. In this video we can see another Ukrainian vehicle that was destroyed by the Russians. Now let's move further. As for the Sivas direction, nothing special. In the Chasiv Yar direction, there are very heavy clashes on the southern part of the settlement. During the previous 24 hours, according to information we have, the Russians managed to improve their positions and to get as close as possible towards the Tselkovskovo street that is located on the southern part of the city of Chasiv Yar. So based on this video, we can make a conclusion that the Russians are doing everything they can with the purpose to take under control Tselkovskovo street, and if the Russians are able to take this street under complete control, then this is going to be something like operational encirclement for those Ukrainians that are currently located on the territory of the Chasiv Yar industrial zone. On the other side, we have a lots of videos and geolocations that confirm Ukraine attempts to counterattack the Russian positions from the south, and currently there are very heavy clashes for the territory of along the Seversky Donetsk-Donbass canal. The Russian sources published the video how they were FPV droning and attacking the Ukrainian units along the Seversky Donetsk-Donbass canal, trying to slow them down and not to allow the Ukrainians to improve their positions. So as you can see, the Ukrainians are doing their best to eliminate and destroy this foothold on the Ukrainian side of the canal, and the Russians from their side are trying to expand their position and to improve them. Now let's discuss the Pokrovsk direction. During the previous 24 hours we haven't received any videos, but we have a lots of different articles published by different sources, and most of them are that's about that the Russians are moving further in the direction of the Dnipro region. The sources are saying that the distance between the Dnipro region and Russian positions is already around 7 kilometers, and the Russians continue improving their positions. Furthermore, there are lots of articles, lots of posts about very difficult situation in this concentration of villages. The Russians are advancing and the Russians are attacking the Ukrainian positions, and so that's it. So let's wait for more geolocations that will allow us to improve the map. As for the Kurakhove direction, we have a lot of very interesting updates, and the most important is coming from the city of Kurakhove itself. I'll remind you that somewhere at noontime on the 31st of December, the Russians from the city of Kurakhove published the video of how they were raising the flag on the territory of industrial zone, and that was something like proof that the Russians managed to secure the city of Kurakhove completely. Based on that video, most of the mappers have adjusted their maps, and but most likely the Russians indeed managed to encircle and to take the city of Kurakhove under complete control, but the city wasn't secured. There were still different pockets of resistance, and most likely just by the 5th of January of 2025 the Russians managed to secure the city of Kurakhove completely, and today the Russians published the video exactly from this point, which means that most likely the citadel was captured by the Russians. Furthermore, according to information we have, according to pro-Russian sources, as a result of offensive operation, the armed force of Russian Federation managed to break through the Ukrainian defense belt and to take the settlement of Petropavlovka under complete control. This is very important offensive operation. Now the Russians will concentrate their activities in the northern direction with the purpose to maintain the line and to take under control the village of Slavianka. And then the Russians will continue moving further in the western direction with the purpose to outflank the Ukrainian positions on the territory of Andreevka. As for the Kurakhove pocket, today we have adjustments on map based on the video that was published by the Ukrainians of 33rd Mechanized Brigade. In this video we can see how the Ukrainians were attacking and FPV droning the Russian units that were moving along the tree lines in this part of Kurakhove front line. Based on this video we have colored the contested area in Russian favor. Furthermore, according to information we have, most likely the Russians were trying to attack the village of Yantarne and then along the river of Sukhiye Yali to move further in the direction of the settlement of Ulakli. But the Ukrainians most likely discovered the Russian plans and they sent lots of FPV drones exactly in this area, and as a result of FPV drone attacks the Ukrainians managed to break the Russian plans and to destroy lots of Russian vehicles. Based on this video we can make a conclusion that the Russians are still fighting for this pocket and the Ukrainians are still showing resistance. As for the Velika Novoselovka direction, if you remember yesterday we discussed how the Russians began bombing and attacking the northern part, the territory of farms of Velika Novoselovka. We made the conclusion that most likely the Russians are about to begin their offensive operation. Maybe they have already launched this attack, but today we got another video from the same area almost, but from the village of Novocheritovate. In this video we can see the same thing, how the Russians were bombing and attacking the Ukrainian positions using multiple launch rocket systems. So this attack, this concentration of Russian fire also reminds us that maybe the Russians are planning to cross the river of Sukhiye Mokry Yali and maybe to attack the Ukrainians in this settlement as well. If the Russians are able to finish this mission, obviously this is going to be a significant result, which will be like something like a turning point in the battle for Velika Novoselovka. Anyway, let's wait and see what is going to be next. As for the Zaporozhye and Dnipro direction, we haven't received anything special. The humanitarian crisis on the territory of Transnistria continue gaining momentum. We continue receiving updates of how the entire region was turned off from electricity. There are some restrictions was adopted by the local authorities. I'll remind you that Transnistria has already less than 50 days to stay in this regime, and after 50 days they're going to be complete humanitarian disaster, and the entire region and 500,000 population would be completely without lights, and this situation will force the Russians to act more aggressively in this area as well. And that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, show my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.